The crystal glass clinked, cutting through the chatter like a knife. Richard stood up, swirling his vintage Cabernet with a smirk that didn't reach his cold eyes. The room went silent, waiting for a loving tribute. Instead, he dropped a bomb that would incinerate 35 years of marriage in a single breath. That day, I learned that love can die without making a sound. It happened on my birthday, right in front of our entire family. My husband, Richard, raised his glass of wine. He smiled with that arrogance I knew too well and said, "Let's toast to Victoria, my wife, the strongest woman I know, because, to be honest, I only married her out of pity." The laughter that followed was a cruel roar that tore me apart from the inside. The chuckles of his brothers, the uncomfortable glances from our children, the heavy silence that settled over the table. It all mixed into a whirlwind that forced me to swallow tears I didn't dare let out. Nobody defended me, not even my oldest son, who just lowered his head and pretended not to hear. I just sat there, with a frozen smile and my soul shattered into pieces. I managed to lift my glass and say with a steady voice, "Thank you, Richard, for reminding me that the most expensive gifts don't always come wrapped. Some come disguised as humiliation." I realized then that my dignity had been slowly chipped away, piece by piece, over 3 decades, and I had let it happen. The silence that followed was more hurtful than the laughter, and while everyone looked away, I knew deep down that this would be the last day I would cry in silence for him. But before we continue, I want to extend a very special invitation. Subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. This helps me see that you support me and enjoy my stories. And comment down below which city you are watching us from. Now let's continue. That night, when everyone had left and the glasses sat empty on the table, I looked him in the eyes and saw something that gave me fear and disgust at the same time. Pleasure. Yes, Richard enjoyed humiliating me. It was his way of reminding me that he dominated me, that I depended on him, that without him I was nobody. But he was wrong. He had confused my silence with weakness and my patience with surrender. I cleared the plates, washed the remains of his party, and went upstairs. He was sleeping, snoring with the tranquility of someone who doesn't fear tomorrow. I watched him for a few seconds, and for the first time in 35 years, I felt no love, no rage, no pity. I felt nothing. And when a woman reaches the point of feeling nothing, it is because something huge is about to change. I sat in front of the mirror. The reflection looking back at me wasn't that of a victim. It was a tired woman, yes, but alive, lucid, with a spark starting to shine where there had only been shadow before. I remembered my younger years, when I was independent, cheerful, free. I remembered that before Richard, I had dreams. I finally understood that the light inside me hadn't faded with age. He had systematically dimmed it with every insult, making me believe his last name was the only thing that gave me value. The next morning, while he read the newspaper as if nothing had happened, I served him breakfast in silence. He didn't even look at me. He just commented, with that irony that always accompanied him. "Don't get so emotional, Victoria. Last night was just a joke. You know how I am." I looked up and observed him, his cynical smile, his arrogant security. And something inside me clicked. A cold calm took over me. I took a napkin, wiped my hands delicately, and said, "Yes, Richard, I know exactly how you are." And he didn't understand the true meaning of those words, but I did. That afternoon, when he left the house for work, I sat in front of the phone and wrote a message. It was for Daniel, his best friend, a man who had always been kind to me, who once, in silence, told me with his eyes that I deserved something better. "Hello, Daniel. It's Victoria. I need to talk to you, but not about Richard. About me. I pressed send without thinking about it anymore, and when I did, something inside me broke, or maybe it was liberated. That night, I slept for the first time in a long time without crying. I dreamed of Richard's laughter, but it didn't hurt. I dreamed of Daniel's gaze, and I felt peace. I didn't know if my message was the beginning of revenge or the first step toward my salvation. But I did know one thing. I was no longer the same woman who had stayed quiet in the face of laughter. Another woman had been born, and this one didn't plan on keeping quiet ever again. Not even an hour passed since I sent that message when I saw the read receipts appear on the screen. My heart raced. Daniel was online. I thought maybe he would ignore my message, or that he would only answer out of obligation, as one does with someone trapped for decades in a dead marriage. But his answer arrived almost immediately. "Victoria, you don't have to explain anything to me. If you need to talk, I'm listening. I always will." I stared at those words for a long minute. I always will. They were 3 simple words, but they held something my husband hadn't given me in 35 years. Willingness, presence, respect. The next morning, I called him. His voice, deep and serene, made me feel a strange peace. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop downtown, one that Richard never visited because he said, "Only people with no class go there." When I arrived, Daniel was already waiting for me. Time had changed him, but his eyes remained the same. Clear, honest, the kind that look at you without judging. He stood up and hugged me carefully, as if he feared breaking something. "You look tired, Victoria," he told me, but also different. "It's just that I'm not afraid anymore," I replied. We sat down. I ordered a black coffee, he ordered tea. We talked about simple things at first, the weather, his grandchildren, the years that had passed. But one silence was enough, one of those dense silences that only exist between 2 people who understand each other without speaking, for the words to start pouring out of my mouth like a contained river. I told him about the dinner, the laughter, the humiliation. I told him I didn't cry, that something inside me had broken forever. And when I finished, Daniel didn't give me advice. He didn't tell me to forget it, or that men are just like that. He only said, "You didn't deserve that. Never." And it was the first time in years that someone told me the truth without decorations, without pity, without disguising it. For days, our conversations became a secret routine. We sent each other short messages, sometimes banal, sometimes profound. I told him how Richard came home smelling of someone else's perfume, how he bragged about business deals that didn't exist, how his laughter stuck in me like a thorn every night. And Daniel listened always with patience, always with that respect that gave me my breath back. One day he wrote me, "Victoria, you can't let him keep destroying you. You don't need revenge. You need to be you again." But I wasn't ready to listen to that. At that moment, I still didn't want to be me. I wanted Richard to pay. I wanted him to feel just a fraction of the smallness I had felt every single day. So I changed the subject and proposed something. "Do you remember Richard told you about that meeting he has on Friday?" I said over the phone. "Yes." "Why?" "Because he's not going. He's going to tell me he has to stay at the office, and in the meantime, I want us to see it together." Daniel stayed silent. "Are you sure, Victoria? I need to know the truth with my own eyes." He accepted, although his tone held more worry than curiosity. On Friday, I picked him up at the corner of my street. I wore a simple dress and a scarf around my neck to hide the trembling of my hands. We parked in front of the restaurant where Richard supposedly had a business dinner. We didn't wait long to see him arrive, accompanied by a young woman in a red dress and a loud laugh. I saw him take her hand. I saw him kiss her before entering. Daniel said nothing. He only looked at me, awaiting my reaction. But I didn't cry. I didn't feel rage. I felt liberation. It was as if seeing him with her, what I had known for years, was confirmed. That man no longer had power over me. I took a deep breath and told him, "Thank you for accompanying me." "You didn't have to verify it, Victoria," he replied. "You already knew?" "Yes, but seeing it hurts less than imagining it." We stayed there in silence, me looking at the restaurant door, him looking at me, and for an instant, time seemed to stop. That night, Richard arrived drunk, threw his keys on the table, and yelled at me from the hallway. "Are you not planning to serve me dinner, or are you going to keep playing the victim?" I stood up slowly and looked at him. "I am no longer your victim, Richard." "What are you saying?" He laughed. "Nothing. Good night." I went up to the bedroom and locked the door. I lit a candle and opened my notebook. I started writing everything, in detail, as if it were a war journal. Every wound has a memory. Every silence has a limit. And while I wrote, I understood that what had started as an impulse for revenge was transforming into something bigger, into a recovery. Daniel gave me back the reflection I thought was lost. He made me feel visible, capable, human, and the most dangerous part, he was starting to matter to me. A few days later, he called. "Can I see you?" he asked. "What for?" I answered, trying to sound indifferent. "To remind you that you don't need to serve justice by destroying yourself in the process." That night, we met again at the same coffee shop. We spoke little, but when our gazes crossed, I knew something was changing. There was an invisible bridge between us, built of understanding and shared wounds. And I, who had sworn never to feel again, found myself wishing that conversation would never end. Upon arriving home, I looked at Richard sleeping with his mouth open, oblivious to everything. And in that silence, with the dim light of the hallway entering the room, I made myself a promise. I would no longer live waiting for his love. I couldn't change the past, but I could decide what to do with the rest of my story. That night, before sleeping, I wrote a single line in my notebook. I don't want him to suffer. I want him to understand what it is to lose me. And for the first time, I smiled, without guilt. They say that when you look back, the past observes you too. And in those days, every memory returned a gaze that hurt more than any insult. While I wrote in my notebook, the years of marriage appeared to me as frozen scenes, one after another, as if my mind wanted to explain to me at what moment I stopped being me to become her, the silent wife of Richard Sterling. When I met him, I was 25 years old. I worked as an art teacher in a small school. He was a manager at an import company, elegant, confident, with that deep voice that wrapped around you without you noticing. He made me feel special. He said he admired my sensitivity, that he liked my paintings, that I had something different from the others. And I, coming from a humble family, fell into the trap of feeling chosen. The first months were like a dream. Flowers, letters, dinners at expensive restaurants where he made me laugh and held my hand in front of everyone. "I want to take care of you," he told me once. I didn't understand then that wanting to take care of someone can be the most elegant form of wanting to control them. After we got married, he started to change. First, it was the small comments. "That dress doesn't fit you well." "Don't paint so much." "That doesn't make money." "Don't speak so loudly when we are with my partners." And little by little, without me noticing, I stopped laughing the same way. I stopped painting. I stopped talking so much. When I told him I wanted to have children, he replied, "In due time. For now, I need a wife who accompanies me, not a mother who distracts me." Still, Our son was born 2 years later, and I raised him almost alone, while Richard traveled and returned more distant each time. I clung to the memories of the good days, to those few times he hugged me for real, or made me feel that my voice mattered. But soon, those moments turned into crumbs. He gave affection when he needed control. If I complained, he made me feel guilty. If I stayed quiet, he made me feel invisible. For years, I thought the problem was me, that if I was more patient, sweeter, more compliant, things would improve. But the truth is that there are loves that cannot be cured with tenderness. They rot with it. And it was in one of those silences that Daniel reappeared in my life. A friend from youth, someone who was always close, but never too close. I remember a day he came to the house, over 20 years ago, and Richard introduced him with pride. "He is my best friend," he said, while I served coffee, and Daniel smiled at me with a gentleness that contrasted with my husband's cold gaze. That afternoon, when he left, Richard told me with a threatening tone, "Don't look at him so much. I don't want him to think you like him." And that was how I understood that not even looking was free in my marriage. I returned to the present with a shiver. Time had passed, but the scars were still there, invisible and deep. I took an old photo, one of the few left from our wedding day. Me, in white, radiant, naive. Him, in a dark suit, with that smile that I then confused with love. Now I saw it for what it was, a mask. In that instant, the phone rang. It was Daniel. "Are you okay?" he asked with a worried voice. "Yes," I lied. "I was just thinking about the past." "Don't think so much about him," he told me. "The past can't hurt you if you stop visiting it." I wish it were that easy. It's not, but it's necessary. His voice had something soothing about it, and although I was afraid to admit it, I liked listening to him. There was a tenderness in his words that reminded me who I was before being erased. It wasn't love yet. It was recognition. And that was already a danger, because Richard was starting to notice. That night, he came home early. Something uncommon. He smelled of whiskey and jealousy. "Who were you talking to?" he asked without looking at me. "With no one," I replied, knowing he wouldn't believe me. He walked over, snatched the phone from my hands, and checked my messages. He found nothing, because I had learned to delete the conversations, but his gaze pierced me with rage. "Don't embarrass me, Victoria. You know that without me, you are nobody." I didn't answer, but in my head, a different voice, stronger, told me, "Not anymore, Richard. Not anymore." When he went up to sleep, I stayed on the sofa, looking at the window. Outside, the city lights flickered as if the world kept turning without me. And I thought about something Daniel had said days before. Sometimes, revenge isn't hurting the other person. It's stopping living under their shadow. I fell asleep with that phrase in my mind. The next day, I received a letter in the mailbox. It was from Daniel. Inside, a handwritten note. "I don't know if what you feel for me is gratitude or something else, but I want you to remember this. You deserve a life where you don't have to ask permission to breathe." I wept. I cried for the woman I had been, for the one I still was, and for the one starting to be born. I didn't know where that path was taking me, but I felt there was no turning back. I closed my diary with one last phrase written in black ink. Sometimes, the love that hurts the most isn't the love you lack, but the love you have left over from the past. And that night, while Richard snored, I promised myself that the next memory I had of myself wouldn't be of a broken woman, but of a free woman. I never thought silence could make so much noise. My silence, the same one that for years was a symbol of submission, had become a threat. Richard noticed it. And when a man like him feels he is losing control, his fear disguises itself as fury. That morning, I walked down the stairs with a calm step. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the kitchen, and the sunlight sneaked through the curtains. It was a morning like any other, but in the air there was something different. I was different. I sat in front of him with a serenity that disconcerted him. "Are you not going to say anything to me?" he asked, without lifting his eyes from the newspaper. "About what?" I answered, while I stirred the sugar in my cup. "About last night. I spoke to you, and you didn't even look at me." "Maybe because I have nothing left to say to you, Richard." His eyes shot up sharply, looking for the usual submission, but he didn't find it. He only saw a calm that disarmed him. "What is wrong with you lately?" he said, trying to sound authoritative. "Nothing. I simply got tired of being your shadow." He fell silent, and for an instant, I could see something new in his face. Insecurity. He didn't know how to react to a woman who didn't tremble, who didn't apologize, who didn't justify her existence. He tried to smile, but his laugh cracked. "Wow, you're finally becoming entertaining," he muttered with contempt. "No, Richard, I am becoming free." He let the cup drop with a dry thud. The coffee spilled on the table, staining the white tablecloth, and that small accident was like an omen. Something was about to break. During the following days, the tension grew in the house. His comments became more biting, his gestures more controlling, but they didn't affect me anymore. There was something in me that scared him. My indifference. My peace infuriated him more than any scream. One afternoon, he entered my studio without knocking. I was painting, after many years. The smell of oil paint filled the air, and on the canvas, strokes of light and shadow were beginning to be born, as if my soul was stripping naked for the first time in decades. He stood in the doorway, observing. "Again with your nonsense?" he said. "Yes." "My nonsense?" I replied without looking at him. "And what does that mean?" "That I no longer need your permission to exist." That phrase threw him off. For a second, he seemed to want to yell at me, but he didn't. He simply turned around and left, slamming the door so hard that the wet painting trembled on the easel. I smiled, because his anger was the confirmation of my silent victory. That night, Daniel called me. His voice was my refuge. "Is everything okay?" he asked. "Better than ever. I think Richard is starting to fear me." "He doesn't fear you," he replied. "He respects you, and he doesn't know how to handle it." "Respect?" I laughed softly. "I don't know if that word exists in his world." "Then invent it yourself," he said. "You are stronger than you think, Victoria." His words caressed my soul, and for an instant, I thought about how unfair destiny had been. Why did the right man arrive so late? I wondered if I could have been happy all these years, if I hadn't wasted my youth trying to please a statue made of ice. But immediately I understood that it wasn't a matter of time, but of transformation. Daniel hadn't arrived to replace Richard. He had arrived to remind me who I was before being destroyed. That night, when I went to bed, Richard watched me from the other side of the bed. "Who are you talking to so much lately?" he asked, with a hoarse voice. "With myself," I answered. "Don't lie to me, Victoria. I know when you're plotting something." "Then, for once in your life, trust your instinct," I told him, turning my back. The silence that followed was thick, tense, unbearable. But behind it, there was something I recognized. Fear. For the first time, Richard was afraid of losing control. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of losing him. The days turned into a game of glances, into a battlefield disguised as routine. He tried to provoke me with cruel comments, waiting for my reaction, but I didn't give it to him, and that indifference was his most painful punishment. One afternoon, while I was putting on makeup in front of the mirror, he asked me with sarcasm, "And where are you going all dressed up?" "To live," I answered him, and I left. That night, when I returned, I found him waiting for me on the sofa with a cigarette between his fingers and a glass of whiskey half finished. "Where were you?" he asked. "Walking?" "Don't take me for a fool." "Relax, Richard. I don't need to do that. You do it very well yourself." His face changed. He stood up abruptly, with the glass still in his hand. "Be careful, Victoria. You don't know who you are playing with." "Yes, I do," I said, looking him in the eyes, "with a man who doesn't scare anyone anymore." The glass fell to the floor, breaking into 1,000 pieces. The echo of the glass was the exact sound of what was happening between us. The first crack. That night I slept with the door locked and a calm heart. I was no longer the obedient wife, nor the invisible woman. I was a woman who had learned that, sometimes, revenge isn't attacking, but ceasing to fear. While I fell asleep, I wrote in my diary, "The first crack isn't heard, but when it appears, nothing is ever the same again." And although I couldn't imagine it, that crack would soon turn into an earthquake. One that would not only crumble my marriage, but reveal secrets that had been buried for years. The air felt different that afternoon, a mix between calm and foreboding. A week had passed since the last argument with Richard, and although he kept acting with his usual arrogance, something in his look had changed. He didn't see me like before, and that, more than his fury, gave me satisfaction. I had resolved not to allow him one more wound, and yet, the heart is treacherous. Between so much silence and so much tension, the only thing that managed to soothe me was hearing Daniel's voice. He had become my refuge again. But this time, his voice wasn't just comfort. It was an open door to another life. We had met at his house. It was the first time I visited him since it all started. I remember that upon arriving, the smell of old wood and fresh coffee wrapped around me like a caress. On a shelf, there were photos of his late wife, his grandchildren, simple moments but full of truth. It was a home with a soul, something I hadn't felt in a long time. "You look calmer," he told me while pouring the coffee. "More decided," I replied. "And is that good or dangerous?" "Depends on who is asking." I smiled at him. We laughed. It was a light, mature laugh, like the one shared by two people who understand each other without the need for words. And in that pause, his gaze became more serious. "Victoria, there is something I need to tell you. But before we continue, I want to make a very special invitation. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like. This helps me see that you support me and enjoy my stories. And comment down below which city you are watching us from. Now, let's continue, because what comes next will give you goosebumps." His tone was grave, almost confessional. "I have been reviewing some of Richard's papers," he said. "Papers? Why?" "Because a month ago, he asked me for a favor. He wanted me to help him open a new account, but something didn't add up." "New account? What are you talking about?" Daniel looked at me fixedly. "Your husband has hidden money, Victoria. And not only that, there is an insurance policy in his name, signed after you two got married. And," he said with his heart racing, "the beneficiary is not you." The silence that followed was so thick that the air seemed to stop. I felt a coldness that ran from my chest to my hands. "Are you sure?" I asked with a thread of a voice. "Completely. He signed it recently. It is in the name of Ashley Miller." "Ashley?" I repeated, confused. His secretary? Yes, the same one. I brought a hand to my face, trying to assimilate it. It was as if a hidden door had opened before me, revealing not only his betrayal, but his plan. So, I whispered, if something happened to me, she would keep everything? Exactly. My heart was beating strongly. All the pieces fit. His absences, his irritability, his sudden interest in my schedule, his insistence that I not go out alone. Richard wasn't just betraying me. He was preparing to erase me from the map. Daniel, I said, trembling, if that is true, I need proof. I have it, but you must promise me something. Don't do anything reckless. I already made promises that killed me little by little. Not this time. Victoria, listen to me. You can't face him alone. I am not going to. I am going to let him destroy himself. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed sitting in front of the mirror, looking at my hands, wondering at what moment I went from being a wife to being a witness to my own ruin. But something inside me also lit up. It wasn't fear. It was determination. I checked my accounts, my papers, my personal items. I discovered that some documents had disappeared. Among them, the deed to the house. It was then that I understood everything. Richard was moving every piece with precision, and I, meanwhile, had to pretend I knew nothing. The next morning, I went downstairs with a rehearsed calm. I found him eating breakfast, impeccable as always, glancing at the newspaper with that false elegance that repulsed me so much. You slept well, he said without looking at me. Like an angel, I replied. I'm glad. Today I have an important meeting. I'll be back late. Perfect. I'll take the opportunity to organize some papers. Papers? He asked, raising an eyebrow. Nothing important, I said, smiling. His gaze swept me up and down, looking for signs, suspicions, fear. But he found nothing, and that was my victory. When he left, I followed him in silence. I saw him meet with Ashley in a cafe downtown. She took his hand with a familiarity that churned my stomach. But I didn't cry. Not anymore. I recorded everything from the car. Their conversation, their gestures, even the moment he passed her an envelope. I knew that video, together with the evidence Daniel had, would be my definitive weapon. Returning home, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Power. A quiet, cold power. Precise. That of a woman who no longer waits for justice. The setup. That night, when Richard returned, I received him with a smile. He looked at me strangely. Why are you so quiet? Because words sometimes get in the way. And what does that mean? You'll know, Richard. Very soon you will know. When he went to sleep, I took out my notebook and wrote, I have discovered the truth, but I am not going to shout it. The truth, when kept in silence, can be more lethal than any revenge. I closed the notebook and looked out the window. The night was calm, the type of calm that precedes the storm. And this time, the storm would carry my name. Once you know the truth, you can never sleep the same again. Since Daniel showed me those documents, every night became a rehearsal of what was to come. While Richard slept beside me, I planned, memorized, acted, and every breath of his, every tranquil snore, reminded me how little remained of that false security he loved so much. Sunday morning, I went down early to the kitchen. I prepared coffee, put flowers in the center of the table, and checked my phone. Everything was ready. I had sent the messages the night before, with a cordial and neutral tone. Dears, I expect you on Friday for a special dinner at home. I want to celebrate family, life, and new beginnings. I knew they would all come. My son, his wife, Richard's brothers, and of course him. Nobody would miss the show. I dressed in a blue dress that had been stored away for years. It was the same one I used on our 20th anniversary, before his cruelty made me forget I was beautiful. I looked in the mirror, and for the first time in decades, I recognized myself. That afternoon, Daniel came by the house. He carried a folder in his hand and a serious expression. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. More than ever. This could sink him. "No, Daniel. This is going to show who he always was." I sat in front of him. Inside the folder were copies of the accounts, the audio recordings, the transfers, and the messages Daniel had recovered. Sufficient evidence to destroy Richard's reputation and prove he had tried to swindle me, even eliminate me from the insurance. "Just promise me something," I told him. "Anything. If something happens to me, hand it all over to the police." He nodded, in silence. And for a moment I thought about everything that could have been if I had met him sooner. But life doesn't go in reverse. Sometimes it only lets you choose the way to close the circle. Friday arrived. The house was spotless, the table set, the wine ready. I lit candles, put on soft music, and waited. One by one, the guests began to arrive, smiling, feigning harmony that never existed. Richard entered last. He brought a bottle of expensive wine, and that fake smile of someone who believes they are in control. "Wow, looks like someone went to some trouble," he said with a smirk. "I just want a quiet night," I replied. During dinner, everyone talked about banalities. I pretended to laugh, served the dishes, observed every gesture. Ashley, the secretary, wasn't there, but her shadow was. Richard didn't stop looking at his phone, nervous, as if waiting for a message. And then I did it. I waited for the exact moment when everyone had a glass in hand and the conversations mixed. I tapped the glass gently with a spoon. The crystal sound made silence fall over the table. Before dessert, I said with a calm voice, "I want to show you all something." I turned on the TV screen. On it appeared the images. Richard in the cafe with Ashley holding her hand, handing her an envelope. The laughter drowned. The air became dense. Richard paled. "What is this?" he asked with a broken voice. "Just a reminder," I replied, "of what happens when one forgets who they are married to." My son stood up, confused. "Dad, what are you doing with that woman?" "It's not what it looks like," Richard shouted. "This is a trap." "Oh no," I interrupted. "Traps are made with lies, and this is only the truth." I took the folder and put it on the table. "Here are the documents of your secret account, Richard, and here, the insurance policy that excludes me. By the way, congratulations. You were very careful, but not enough." The silence was total. You could hear the trembling of his breathing. Everyone's eyes were pinned on him, and for the first time, I saw him small. That man who for years believed himself a giant in front of me now shrank before his own shame. "So that's what you were?" I said with a frozen calm. "A coward who needed to crush a woman to feel strong. A traitor who signed my sentence while I served him dinner." Richard slammed the table. "Shut up! Enough!" "Does it bother you to hear what you did?" I replied. "Well, get used to it, because tonight everyone is going to hear it." I took out my phone and played the audio of his conversation with Ashley. "I just have to make sure she signs the document. Once she's gone, everything will be yours." The faces around the table decomposed. My son took a step back, as if he didn't recognize the man in front of him. Richard, red with fury, tried to take the phone from me. I pushed him away firmly. "Touch me, and it will be the last thing you do," I told him. Chaos erupted. Shouts, reproaches, tears. The family crumbled before my eyes. but I felt no guilt, only a strange peace, that of someone who is finally freed from the weight of fear. Richard looked at me, defeated. What did you gain with this, Victoria? Myself? And do you think they are going to believe you? They don't need to. I have proof, and you have hell waiting for you. I turned around and walked toward the door. Nobody stopped me. I only heard my son say between sobs, "Dad, how could you?" That night, I slept alone, but it wasn't a sad loneliness. It was the loneliness of freedom, of someone who no longer needs anyone's approval to feel alive. Before turning off the light, I wrote in my notebook, "Masks always fall. You just have to have the courage to wait for the exact moment to rip them off." And with that, I closed my eyes, knowing that the next day nothing would ever be the same. The silence of the next day was so deep, I could hear the ticking of the clock like someone else's heart. No shouting, no crying, no footsteps, just the echoes of everything that had exploded the night before. The house was calm, but it wasn't the calm of peace. It was the calm of the aftermath. That instant when the dust settles over the ruins. I walked barefoot through the living room, picking up the remains of the banquet. Overturned glasses, crumpled napkins, a tablecloth stained with wine and truth. Everything smelled of defeat, but not mine. I stopped in front of the hallway mirror. The woman looking back wasn't the same one who had endured humiliations for decades. Her eyes were serene, but firm. There was something almost dangerous in that calm, something only known to women who survived their own fear. Mid-morning, the phone rang. I let it ring 3 times before answering. "What do you want, Richard?" I asked without emotion. "We need to talk. We have nothing to say to each other." "I'm outside." I stayed silent for a few seconds. I looked out the window, and there he was, standing with a haggard face, shirt unironed, eyes red. The great Richard Sterling, the man who always believed himself indestructible, now looked like a shadow. I opened the door. He entered without asking permission, as always, but this time not because he had power, but because he didn't know how to act any other way. He stood there, looking around with a mix of rage and bewilderment. "You took down the photos," he said. "Yes." "You threw them away." "No, I burned them." His lips trembled. "What did you do, Victoria?" "What I should have done years ago. Clean the house." "Clean?" He laughed nervously. "You destroyed me?" "No, Richard. I just took off your mask." He approached with tense shoulders, and his breath smelled of alcohol and desperation. "Was it necessary to do it in front of everyone?" he said with a broken voice. "Yes." "Because you humiliated me in front of everyone." "That was a joke, damn it!" he shouted, hitting the table. "A joke?" I repeated slowly, enjoying every syllable. "You laughed at me for 35 years, Richard, and when I couldn't take it anymore, when I decided to return the smile, you call it a joke." He stayed quiet. His look was that of a cornered man, incapable of understanding how power had slipped from his hands. "What did you gain with this?" he asked with bitterness. "Me." "You?" he laughed. "You are alone, Victoria. What good does that do you?" "Everything. Loneliness doesn't scare me. I already spent all my fear on you." He smoked nervously, walking from one side to the other. "You can't destroy me like this. You don't know who you're messing with." "Of course I know. I have contacts, I have lawyers, I have people." "Had?" I interrupted him. "You don't have anything anymore." I showed him the folder on the table. His hands trembled when he took it. A Upon opening it, his expression changed from arrogance to terror. There were the copies of the transfers, the emails with Ashley, the bank records, every lie, every trap, every signature. "Where did you get this?" he stammered. "It doesn't matter. This has no legal value. You don't need it anymore because I already handed it over." The cigarette fell from his hands. "What?" "The report is filed." "No, you can't have done it." "I did it yesterday, and just in case, I also sent it to the press." His face turned to ash. He let himself fall into the chair. "Why are you doing this to me?" he said in a threat of a voice. "Make no mistake, Richard. This isn't revenge. It's justice." He observed me with a mix of hate and pleading. "You can't sink me, not after everything I gave you." "Gave me?" I laughed with incredulity. "What did you give me? The scars? The nights of fear? The years I lost believing I was worth less than I was?" "You gave me ruins, and with them I built my freedom." He tried to get up, but his legs trembled. He looked old, not from years, but from the weight of emptiness. "You weren't like this," he said through his teeth. "No, you made me like this. You are worse than me." "No, I just learned to speak your language and to use it against you." He approached slowly, with glassy eyes. For a moment I thought he was going to hit me, but he didn't. He only looked at me, as if searching for something of the woman he knew. "Victoria," he whispered, "don't hate me. I don't hate you." "Then why?" "Because I needed to look you in the eyes and for you to know what it feels like to be small." The door burst open. It was my son. I didn't expect to see him there, but Daniel had told him what happened. He brought a tense, confused face. "Dad, what did you do?" he asked. Richard turned toward him. "Son, don't listen to what your mother says. She is—" "I saw the documents," my son interrupted him. "You don't know what you are doing." "Yes, I do. You destroyed Mom, and now you destroy yourself alone." Richard was left without words. His eyes filled with tears, and I don't know if it was from shame or fear. My son approached me and took my hand. "Let's go, Mom." "No, I want to hear him," I said. He shook his head. "He has nothing left to say." Richard collapsed in the chair with his head in his hands. "Is this how it all ends?" he murmured. "Yes," I replied. "This is how it ends when a lie lasts too long." I approached slowly and left an envelope in front of him. "What is this?" he asked. "The divorce papers." "So fast?" "I had them ready for months. I was just waiting for the right moment." And he opened them. Inside, together with the signature, was a photo of us from the wedding day. On the back, I wrote a single sentence. "Thank you for teaching me who I never want to be again." He stood up wobbling, with a gray face, suddenly aged. "And what are you going to do now, Victoria?" "Live. Alone? Free." He stayed looking at me for a long while, with that mix of resentment and melancholy that men have when they discover their power is finished. And then, before leaving, he asked with a dull voice, "And Daniel? Will you use him too?" "I don't need to use anyone, but if he accompanies me, it will be because he wants to, not because he fears me." He turned his head to the side with glassy eyes. "You are cruel." "No, Richard. I am consequence." He walked to the door. His hand trembled as he turned the knob. For an instant, I thought he was going to say something else, some last phrase to try to regain control. But no. He only murmured, "I never believed your silence could hurt more than your words." and he left. The house fell back into silence, a different silence. It was no longer the silence of submission, but that of closure. I stood in the middle of the living room, breathing deeply. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I didn't pray. I only felt relief. Minutes later, the phone rang. It was Daniel. "Is everything okay?" he asked. "Yes," I replied. "It's done. And how do you feel?" "Light?" "I told you," he whispered. "Sometimes justice doesn't need to shout, only hold the gaze." That night I saw him again. We met at the cafe where it all started. Daniel waited for me with that quiet smile that always reminded me what respect was. We ordered wine and spoke little. It wasn't necessary. Between us, words had ceased to be necessary. I told him how the visit went. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he looked at me with tenderness. "Did you realize something, Victoria?" he asked. "What?" "That you defeated him without turning into him." I didn't know what to answer. I only nodded, with a knot in my throat, because he was right. I didn't destroy him with hate, but with truth. And that was the greatest victory of all. Upon returning home, I lit a candle. The flame trembled an instant before stabilizing. I watched it for a long while. It was small but firm, like me. I took my notebook and wrote, "The final blow isn't when the other falls. It is when you realize that you no longer need to watch them fall to feel free." I closed the diary, looked around. The house was at peace. And for the first time in 35 years, so was I. 6 months have passed since that night when everything crumbled. 6 months since Richard crossed the door for the last time with the face of a man who didn't understand how he had lost everything he thought he had secured. Sometimes I think of him, not with hate, nor with nostalgia, only with that distance one reserves for memories that ache, but no longer wound. It is curious how the silence that used to suffocate me now feels like a refuge. I live alone in the same house where the shadow of my fear used to inhabit, but it is no longer the same. I changed the curtains. I painted the walls. I donated the furniture he chose. Every corner now bears my mark, a silent declaration of independence. In the kitchen hangs a painting I painted recently, a woman with her back turned looking at the sea. Some say she looks sad, but she isn't. That woman is at peace because she understood that looking toward the horizon isn't always waiting. Sometimes it is giving thanks. During the first days after his departure, there was a strange void, almost physical. Not the void of missing someone, but of getting used to the absence of the habit. After 35 years of living with a constant presence, even silence has a weight. I woke up by inertia at 6 a.m. I prepared 2 cups of coffee, and then remembered there was no one left to serve. The first sip tasted of freedom, but also of loneliness. I learned that freedom doesn't always arrive dressed in joy. Sometimes it arrives like a wounded animal, trembling, distrustful, but alive. And one has to learn to feed it, to care for it, until it stops being afraid to stay. The first months were an exercise in reconstruction, of my body, of my mind, of my name. For years, I got used to hearing my name only in his voice, pronounced with contempt or indifference. Now I say it, slowly, in front of the mirror, as if it were a prayer. Victoria. What irony, right? Wearing that name and having lived defeated for so long. I went back to painting. The smell of oil saved me more than once. Hands stained with color reminded me that I could still create beauty, even after having inhabited hell. Sometimes I stopped in front of the canvas, breathed deeply, and told myself, This is also revenge, Victoria. Not destroying, but building anew. Richard didn't go to prison. The evidence Daniel and I presented was enough to get him fired, for him to lose his reputation and his money, but not to lock him up. I didn't care. The true sentence was seeing him lose what he loved most: his son's respect, power over me, the image of himself. His punishment was living knowing that nobody believed him anymore. I heard through common friends that he lives in a small rented apartment, far from the city. They say he aged all at once, that he barely goes out, that he drinks more than he eats. Sometimes, when I think about that, I feel a pang of compassion, and then I remember that he never had compassion for me, and then I let the feeling dissolve, like a leaf carried by the river. Daniel, on the other hand, continued being my lighthouse, not my savior, nor my partner, nor my excuse. Just a companion in this process of reconstruction. We see each other often. We drink coffee, walk through the park, talk about art, about life, about how time changes us without asking permission. He never pressures me. He demands nothing of me. And that, after so many years of oppression, feels like the greatest act of love. One afternoon, while we were walking, he told me something I still keep in my heart. Sometimes we confuse love with the habit of suffering, and when we stop suffering, we believe we stopped loving. But true love doesn't hurt, Victoria. It heals. I didn't answer. I only smiled, because I understood that for the first time someone saw me without trying to define me. And that simple look was enough to remind me that love doesn't have to be a battlefield. It can be a place to rest. The divorce trial was quick. Richard didn't show up. My lawyer told me he signed the papers without reading them, with a note in the margin. I don't want to see her again. And so it was. I never saw him again, not even when his mother died, nor when they sold his parents' old house. Nothing. It was as if we had been ghosts to one another, but the funny thing is that it didn't hurt, because deep down, I had already said goodbye to him long before. I had buried him in silence the day he humiliated me in front of everyone. What died at that dinner wasn't our marriage. It was my fear. I realized that fear is a heavy coat you wear so long you forget you can take it off. Sometimes at night, I go out to the garden with a glass of wine and look at the stars. I think about all the versions of myself I had to let die to get here. The obedient wife, the invisible woman, the one who stayed quiet to avoid a fight, the one who convinced herself the fault was hers. I bury them one by one, with tenderness, because all of them brought me to this woman I am now. And then, in a low voice, I tell them, thank you for surviving when I didn't know how to. Not everything is perfect, of course. There are days when the past returns with its bitter echo. There are mornings when I still wake up startled, expecting to hear his voice shouting from the hallway. But I don't tremble anymore. I just smile and tell myself, relax, Victoria. He is not here. He can't touch you anymore. I have learned that healing is not forgetting. It is remembering without bleeding out. It is looking at the scar and saying, yes, it hurt, but it doesn't hurt anymore. Recently, my son came to visit me. I hadn't seen him for months. He arrived with a bouquet of flowers and eyes full of guilt. Mom, he said, I never knew everything you were going through. I thought you were exaggerating. Don't blame yourself, son, I replied. There are things a mother cannot explain without breaking. Did you forgive him? He asked. I thought for a few seconds before answering. Yes, but not for him. For me. Because forgiveness isn't absolving the other person. It's stopping carrying their shadow, my son cried. So did I. And that hug was like coming home after a long winter. One night I dreamed of Richard. He was sitting in front of me at the dining table with a tired look. He didn't speak to me. He only observed me. And for the first time, there was no hate in his face, only resignation. I woke up without fear and understood that the cycle had finally closed. Fan Ba. The ending. Today I am 61 years old and I feel more alive than ever. I don't need a partner to feel complete, nor a full house to feel accompanied. I have my paintings, my plants, my books, my silences, and my name. That is enough. The freedom isn't measured by how many doors you can open, but by how many you decide not to cross again. Sometimes, when I walk through the city, people greet me with curiosity, as if trying to guess my story, and I smile, because they don't know that under this serene woman is a hurricane that survived itself. They don't know that every step I take was earned with tears, with courage, and with the certainty that it was worth living, even if it hurt. A few days ago, Daniel gave me a new notebook. "So you can keep writing," he said. "And what should I write now?" I asked. "Your new story. And if I have nothing else to tell, then write what you feel not having to explain yourself anymore." And that is what I do. Every morning I write something small, a reflection, a thought, a phrase, not to publish it, but to remind myself that I am still alive, and that this life, mine and mine alone, is worth more than any ring or last name. Tonight I decided to speak to you, who are listening to me, who reached the end of my story. Maybe you too have had to fake smiles in front of those who hurt you. Maybe you got used to a love that hurt more than it healed. Let me tell you something. From woman to woman, or from soul to soul, don't wait for someone else to save you. Sometimes salvation arrives the day you look in the mirror and decide not to cry anymore for someone who doesn't deserve it. Don't be afraid to be alone. Loneliness, when chosen, becomes a home, and freedom, although it costs, is worth every wound the road leaves. If someone had told me a year ago that I was going to smile for real again, I wouldn't have believed it. But here I am, alive. With wrinkles, yes. With scars, too. But with a dignity that nobody can snatch from me anymore. Because after all, the victory wasn't destroying him. It was rebuilding me. I say goodbye with these words, looking at the camera, with a serene voice and a calm heart. If they ever made you feel small, remember this. It wasn't you who was worth little. It was the other person who didn't know how to look at something big. Subscribe. Leave a like if this story touched your heart. And tell me down below, which city are you listening from? Because every story you share reminds me that we are not alone, that life always gives second chances, and that the most powerful love that exists is the one we learn to give ourselves. And so ends my story. My name is Victoria Serrano, and this was my freedom.